Chapter 1. The Text in the Emergency Room. The fluorescent lights above Michael Carter hummed with a faint electrical buzz that never quite stopped. It was the kind of sound you didn't notice until you'd been sitting still too long. Then it became everything. He sat in a molded plastic chair beside a narrow hospital bed, elbows resting on his knees, fingers loosely clasped together. The room was small, painted in a tired shade of beige that tried and failed to feel warm. A thin curtain hung half-drawn near the doorway. Somewhere beyond it, wheels squeaked against tile, and a nurse called out medication dosages in a practiced monotone. Ethan lay beneath a stiff white blanket, dwarfed by the bed. His dark hair stuck slightly to his forehead. A pediatric pulse oximeter glowed red around his small finger. An N4 line ran into the back of his hand, taped down carefully with cartoon bandages the nurse had offered to make it less scary. 6 years old, too young to look this small. The steady beep of the heart monitor cut through the room in gentle intervals. Not urgent, not frantic, just steady. Michael exhaled slowly. "You scared me, buddy," he murmured, brushing Ethan's hair back from his forehead. His son stirred but didn't wake. 2 hours earlier, Ethan had collapsed on the kitchen floor after complaining of dizziness. He'd been pale, clammy, burning with fever. The pediatric urgent care had sent them straight to the ER for fluids and observation. Dehydration, the ER doctor had said. Mild infection. Kids crash fast, but they bounce back fast too. Michael had nodded, gripping Ethan's hand the entire time. Now the worst had passed. The 4 fluids were running. The fever was lowering. The color had returned faintly to his son's cheeks. Michael reached for the clipboard on the tray table beside him. Insurance verification forms. Emergency contact confirmation. Medication consent. He signed his name carefully in the appropriate spaces, his handwriting precise despite the exhaustion pulling at his shoulders. "Dad!" Michael leaned forward immediately. "Yeah, I'm here." Ethan's eyelids fluttered open, glassy but alert enough to recognize him. "Am I staying here? Just for a little while?" Michael said gently. "They're giving you superhero juice through that tube. Once you're powered up, we'll go home." Ethan gave a weak smile. "Can I still finish the lighthouse puzzle?" Michael felt a faint pull at his chest. "Yeah, we'll finish it. Promise." "I promise." Ethan's eyes drifted closed again. Michael watched him breathe for several seconds before reaching for his phone. He hadn't checked it since they'd rushed out of the house. 2 missed calls from work. A text from Rachel. His thumb paused. He expected. What happened? "Is Ethan okay? I'm on my way." He tapped the screen. The message opened instantly. His eyes moved once. Then again. He read it a third time, slower. "I'm not coming back. I'm moving to Miami. I'm with someone who actually understands me. I took what's mine from the accounts. You'll figure it out. Don't try to stop me." The air in the room didn't change, but something inside him did. He didn't blink. He didn't inhale sharply. His face remained still, almost neutral. He scrolled up, searching for context. There was none. No argument leading to it. No warning. No escalation. Just this. He looked over at Ethan. The monitor continued its steady rhythm. Michael read the message again, as if perhaps the words would rearrange themselves into something reasonable. They did not. A vibration buzzed against his palm. A banking notification. He opened it. Transfer complete. $184,612.37 destination account. External. Remaining balance. $0. His jaw tightened. Not visibly, but enough for the muscles near his ears to flex. He opened the banking app manually. Checking. 0. Savings. 0. Joint investment holding account. Cleared. Every number sat clean and empty. Another notification chimed. Overdraft protection alert. Michael locked the phone screen without reacting. Across the room, Ethan shifted slightly and winced in his sleep. Michael stood and moved to the bedside immediately, adjusting the blanket, resting his palm lightly against his son's shoulder. "I've got you," he whispered. The curtain at the door swished open slightly. A nurse stepped in, her expression professional but kind. "How's our brave guy doing?" "He's sleeping," Michael replied evenly. "Good. Fever's coming down nicely." She checked the 4 drip, made a small notation on the digital chart. You okay, Dad? You look like you haven't blinked in a while. Michael gave a polite half-smile. Long night. She nodded knowingly. Parenting. He almost laughed at that. Almost. After she left, the room felt smaller. He walked back to the chair and sat down slowly. His phone felt heavier now. He unlocked it again. He stared at Rachel's name at the top of the message thread. 12 years of conversations above that final declaration. Vacation photos, birthday reminders, grocery lists, arguments about paint colors, messages that ended with love you. His thumb hovered over the call icon. He imagined her answering, or not answering. He imagined shouting, demanding explanations, demanding accountability. He imagined asking, why now? Why today? Why when our son is in a hospital bed? He imagined the answers. And then he imagined Ethan waking up and seeing him unravel. That thought ended everything. He opened the message field. The blinking cursor waited. He typed slowly. 2 words. No punctuation. No accusation. No emotion. Good luck. He pressed send. The message delivered instantly. No typing bubbles appeared in response. He placed the phone face down on the tray table. For a long moment, he simply sat there. The fluorescent light hummed. Footsteps passed outside. A machine down the hall beeped rapidly before being silenced. Inside the room, Ethan's monitor continued its calm, unwavering rhythm. Michael leaned back in the chair and folded his hands together. The storm had arrived without warning. It had emptied accounts. It had erased a marriage. It had chosen its timing with surgical cruelty. But here, in this room, there was only one priority. He stood again and moved closer to the bed. He pulled his chair so near that his knee touched the mattress. He watched the gentle rise and fall of his son's chest. He counted breaths instead of dollars. He focused on numbers that mattered. 1 breath. 2. 3. His face remained still. No trembling hands. No cracking voice. No frantic pacing. Just presence. Outside, the world had shifted on its axis. Inside, a 6-year-old boy slept peacefully beneath hospital blankets, unaware that his family had fractured in the span of a single text message. Michael rested his forearm against the edge of the bed and lowered his head slightly, eyes fixed on the green line pulsing across the monitor. Steady, consistent, unbroken. The storm has started, but he refuses to become it. Chapter 2. The plan was already in motion. By the time Ethan was discharged the next afternoon, the fever had broken and the boy was chatty again, asking for pancakes and insisting the hospital apple juice tasted wrong. Michael carried him out to the car anyway. Can I tell Mom I was brave? Ethan asked from the back seat as Michael buckled him in. Michael's hands paused for half a second on the seatbelt latch. You were brave, he said evenly. That's what matters. Ethan accepted that answer without question. Children often did. The house felt unfamiliar when they stepped inside. Nothing had physically changed. The couch was still aligned against the wall. The framed beach photo still hung above the fireplace. The faint scent of Rachel's lavender diffuser still lingered in the air. But something essential had shifted. Michael set Ethan on the couch with a blanket and turned on a quiet cartoon. Rest. Doctor's orders. Are you staying? Ethan asked. I'm right here. Michael walked into the kitchen and placed both palms flat against the granite countertop. He inhaled slowly. Then he opened his phone. 3 missed calls from an unknown number. 1 voicemail. He pressed play. Mr. Carter, this is a courtesy notification from the county clerk's office. We're calling regarding a petition filed in your name. You should have been served documentation this morning. If you have not received it, please contact. He ended the message. He hadn't been served. He'd been in the ER. His phone buzzed again, an email notification this time. Subject line, petition for dissolution of marriage. The timestamp read 10 days earlier. 10 days. Michael sat down at the kitchen table and opened the attachment. The PDF loaded slowly, page by page. Petitioner, Rachel Carter. Respondent, Michael Carter. Date filed, 10 days ago. He scrolled. Temporary orders requested. Sole legal and physical custody of minor child, Ethan Carter. Immediate relocation authorization to Miami, Florida. Temporary exclusive control of joint marital accounts. His eyes moved carefully absorbing each line. Allegations section. Respondent has demonstrated emotionally volatile behavior within the marital home. Petitioner fears instability and unpredictable responses. Petitioner believes relocation is in the best interest of the minor child. Michael read the sentences twice. Emotionally volatile. Unpredictable. He looked up at the living room, where Ethan was laughing softly at a cartoon character slipping on a banana peel. Unpredictable. Michael scrolled further. A sworn affidavit attached, signed by Diane Whitmore, Rachel's mother. He opened it. Throughout the marriage, I have observed Michael exhibit controlling tendencies. He frequently isolated Rachel emotionally and displayed sudden mood shifts. I believe Rachel's safety and Ethan's well-being require immediate relocation. Michael leaned back in the chair, slowly. Controlling. Sudden mood shifts. He tried to recall a single instance that would justify such phrasing. He remembered working late. He remembered budgeting carefully. He remembered suggesting they delay a vacation 1 year because finances were tight. He remembered telling Rachel that Ethan needed consistency with bedtime routines. He did not remember volatility. The kitchen clock ticked audibly. He checked the filing date again. 10 days. 10 days ago, Rachel had kissed him goodbye before work. 10 days ago, they'd eaten dinner together. 10 days ago, she'd asked him if they should repaint the hallway. He stood abruptly and walked down the hall to the bedroom. Her closet door stood open. Hangers were spaced too widely. Shoes missing from the bottom rack. The jewelry tray on the dresser was empty. She hadn't packed last night. She'd been packing for days. He returned to the kitchen and opened the banking app again. Transaction history. He scrolled back 2 weeks. Small transfers at first. Subtle ones. 5,000, 8,000, 12,000, all labeled vaguely. Consulting services. Investment allocation. External transfer. Then, yesterday's full withdrawal. It hadn't been a single act of impulse. It had been staged, layered, positioned. Michael opened his email again and searched for any prior legal notification. There was none. He checked the front porch camera feed. Yesterday morning, while he was at work, a process server had approached the house. No answer. He'd been in meetings. Later that afternoon, they'd rushed Ethan to urgent care. The paperwork had been delivered digitally after failed physical service. Timed. He walked back into the living room. Ethan looked up. Dad, yeah. Can we finish the puzzle later? We will. You promise. I promise. Ethan nodded and returned to the cartoon. Michael stepped onto the back patio and closed the sliding door behind him. The winter air bit at his skin, but it grounded him. He replayed the sequence in his mind. 10 days ago, divorce filed. Gradual fund transfers. Affidavit prepared. Relocation request drafted. Final withdrawal executed. Text message sent. While he sat in a hospital room, it aligned too precisely. He imagined Rachel drafting that message hours before sending it. He imagined her watching her phone while he rushed Ethan to the ER. He imagined her calculating when the banking transfer would finalize. Not chaos. Coordination. His phone buzzed again. A notification from the court portal. Temporary hearing scheduled. 3 weeks. He read the docket summary. Emergency relocation motion pending. Custody review pending. Financial authority review pending. He looked out of the yard, where Ethan's soccer goal still leaned slightly to one side. She had asked for sole custody. Not shared. Not joint. Sole. And relocation. To Miami. He understood now why she had emptied the accounts before filing. Why the timing had been silent. If he reacted angrily to the text message, she would have documentation. If he panicked about the money, she would frame it as volatility. If he confronted her emotionally, it would reinforce the narrative. Michael's jaw tightened. This wasn't an argument. It was architecture. Documents were timed. Funds were positioned. Jurisdiction was chosen strategically. Even the timing, while he sat in the ER, was calculated. He feels something sharper than anger. Clarity. Chapter 3. Enter Helen Brooks. The law office didn't look intimidating. That surprised Michael. He had expected dark wood panels and leather chairs meant to make people feel small. Instead, the reception area was minimalist. White walls, glass partitions, muted gray furniture arranged with precision. Clean. Controlled. efficient. The receptionist glanced up. Mr. Carter? Yes. She's ready for you. No small talk. No sympathetic tone. He followed the hallway past framed degrees and discreet accolades mounted in thin black frames. At the end of the corridor, a glass door stood slightly open. Helen Brooks, a woman said without standing. She sat behind a wide desk that held almost nothing, just a laptop, a legal pad, and a single fountain pen aligned parallel to the desk's edge. She was in her early 40s, maybe hair pulled into a low bun, navy suit crisp and unadorned. Her eyes were sharp but not unkind. Observant. Michael stepped inside. Mr. Carter, she said, finally rising and offering a firm handshake. Have a seat. He sat. She did not begin with condolences. She did not ask if he was okay. She opened a yellow legal pad and clicked her pen once. Timeline, she said. He blinked slightly. Timeline. Yes. Start with when you became aware. Michael leaned forward. Yesterday evening. I was in the ER with my son. My wife sent a text saying she was leaving, that she'd moved to Miami, that she'd taken the savings. Helen didn't react. How much? $184,000. Joint accounts emptied. She wrote something down. When did she file? 10 days ago. She looked up at him for the first time with measurable interest. You confirmed that? Yes. Court portal. Petition filed 10 days prior. I wasn't served physically. I was in the ER when digital service occurred. Custody request. Sole custody. Emergency relocation to Florida. And grounds. He exhaled once. She claims I'm emotionally volatile. Unstable. Helen's pen stopped moving. Have you ever been arrested? No. Restraining orders? No. Domestic disturbance calls? No. Witnesses to alleged volatility? Her mother submitted an affidavit. Helen nodded once. Name? Diane Whitmore. She wrote it down carefully. Employment? She asked. I work in project management. Engineering firm. Stable income. No performance issues. Alcohol? Substance abuse? No. Medical history indicating instability? No. Document everything you just told me, she said. In writing. Dates. Times. Attach screenshots. Michael stared at her. That's it. For now. She closed the legal pad and folded her hands. You're not here for emotional processing, Mr. Carter. You're here for strategy. He nodded slowly. Good, she said. Then we'll proceed strategically. She reached for her laptop and turned it slightly so he could see the screen. I've reviewed the initial filing. There's something interesting. She scrolled through the petition. Your wife lists minimal personal assets. Standard income disclosure. Joint funds acknowledged. But I see no mention of external trusts. Michael frowned. Trusts? Does your wife's family have one? He hesitated. Her mother mentioned something once. Years ago. Some kind of family trust. I didn't ask details. Helen's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. I pulled public probate filings before you arrived, she said calmly. Michael blinked. Before I arrived? You emailed me last night with the docket number. I prepare. She turned the screen fully toward him. Whitmore Family Trust. Established 15 years ago. Trustee, Diane Whitmore. Primary beneficiaries include Rachel Whitmore Carter. Michael leaned forward. Do you see this? Helen pointed to a line in the filing. Distributions permitted at trustee discretion. What does that mean? It means funds can be released to beneficiaries under specific conditions, often for lifestyle support, investments, or asset acquisition. Michael's mind moved quickly. Our down payment, he said quietly. On the house. Yes. Rachel said it was a family gift. Helen nodded slightly. Likely trust distribution. She opened another document. Any large deposits over the years you couldn't attribute to salary? Yes, he said immediately. Occasional transfers. She said they were family contributions, and they were deposited into joint accounts. Yes. Helen leaned back. That makes them potentially marital. Michael absorbed that slowly. She continued. Now here's the problem for her. She turned the screen again to the divorce petition. No disclosure of trust interest. No mention of anticipated distributions. What does that mean? He asked. It means either she forgot, Helen said evenly, or she intentionally concealed a material financial interest. And that's bad. That omission is serious. She paused. Very serious. Silence settled between them for a moment. Michael's pulse slowed rather than quickened. Helen began outlining next steps without theatrics. I will file an emergency motion to freeze marital assets. That includes any funds transferred within the past 90 days. She began typing as she spoke. I will also file an objection to relocation based on improper jurisdiction timing. Jurisdiction? He asked. She filed here, but she's attempting to move the child to Florida before custody determination. If she establishes residency there, she could attempt to shift venue. Michael nodded slowly. We block that, she said simply. Her fingers continued moving across the keyboard. I'll demand full financial disclosure under oath, including trust documents. And if they refuse, they won't. Courts dislike concealment. She printed something and slid it across the desk. Sign here, authorizing forensic accounting review. Forensic? Yes. We examine transfers. External LLCs. Any unusual movement of funds. Michael hesitated. LLCs. Did you notice any business names in recent transfers? He thought back. Consulting services, he said. Vague descriptions. Helen's eyes sharpened. Give me the statements. He nodded. She stood and walked to a filing cabinet, retrieving a folder already labeled with his name. You're not reacting emotionally, she observed. I don't see the benefit. Good, she replied. Because she's built a narrative expecting one. He considered that carefully. She thinks I'll explode, he said, or panic, or call her repeatedly, or send messages she can submit as evidence. Michael almost smiled faintly. I didn't. Helen returned to her chair. Rachel thought she was ahead. She gathered the documents into a neat stack, but she left fingerprints. She met his eyes directly, and fingerprints are traceable. Chapter 4, Miami's Illusion. The name surfaced quietly. Lucas Monroe. It appeared in a column of transaction data on Michael's laptop screen at 9:30 on a Thursday night. He sat at the dining room table long after Ethan had gone to bed, the house dark except for the glow of the desk lamp and the pale blue light of spreadsheets reflecting in his eyes. Helen had told him to pull 3 years of bank statements. Every transfer, she'd said, even the ones that looked boring. So he went line by line. Utilities, mortgage, groceries, insurance, normal, predictable, domestic. Then, 18 months ago, something shifted. A $7,500 transfer labeled. Consulting services, LM Advisory. He clicked into the details. Recipient, LM Advisory Group, LLC. He frowned slightly. Another transfer 2 months later. $12,000. Same description. 6 weeks after that. $9,300. All to the same entity. All approved from their joint checking account. Michael leaned back in the chair, slowly. Rachel worked in corporate operations for a mid-sized logistics firm. She had colleagues. She mentioned names occasionally at dinner. He whispered out loud. Lucas. The memory sharpened. A holiday party 2 years ago. A tall man in a tailored jacket laughing too loudly at something Rachel had said. Confident handshake. Direct eye contact. Lucas Monroe. The man had introduced himself. We worked together. Michael had nodded politely, thinking nothing of it. Now he pulled up the state business registry database and typed in the LLC name. LM Advisory Group, LLC. Owner, Lucas Monroe. Registered 6 months before the first transfer. Michael's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. He picked up his phone and called Helen. She answered on the second ring. Brooks, I found the LLC. A pause. Details. Lucas Monroe. Registered 18 months ago. Payments from our joint account labeled as consulting services. How many? Rough count. About 85,000 total. Silence on the other end, but not surprise. Documentation? She asked. None in our records. Any contracts? No. Email correspondence? I'm checking. Good, she said. Forward everything. Michael hung up and opened his email archive. He typed Lucas Monroe into the search bar. Dozens of results appeared. Most were benign, calendar invites, company-wide threads, operational memos. Then he refined the search. From Rachel to Lucas. Private. Fewer results. He opened the first. Lucas, the transfer will go through Friday. Use the advisory description like we discussed. R. His breathing didn't change. He opened another. The temporary relocation gives us leverage. Once Florida residency is established, jurisdiction shifts. Diane's advisor agrees. He read that twice. Temporary relocation. Leverage. Advisor. He scrolled further. Asset insulation is critical before filing. We can't risk exposure. Exposure. Michael closed his eyes briefly, not in pain, but in recalibration. This wasn't an affair discovered in hotel receipts or lipstick stains. This was coordinated. He stood and walked to the kitchen sink, filling a glass of water. His movements remained steady. When he returned to the table, he opened a second browser window and searched public records for Lucas Monroe. Professional profile. Corporate strategist. Miami-based satellite office. He scrolled through social media images, sunlit balconies, marina backdrops, rooftop bars with skyline views. Miami. He imagined Rachel there. Sunlight reflecting off glass towers. Warm air. No reminders of mortgage statements or suburban routine. It looked effortless, but he knew now it wasn't. He opened the final thread in the email chain. This one included Diane. Subject line. Strategic timing. Diane. The wealth manager confirmed that trust distributions can temporarily offset liquidity loss. Once the joint funds are reallocated, Rachel will be protected. Florida offers more favorable posture during relocation disputes. L. Below it, Diane's response. Timing must align with filing. Ensure no reactionary behavior from Michael that could jeopardize narrative. Michael stared at that sentence. No reactionary behavior. Narrative. He leaned back slowly in his chair. The pieces aligned with disturbing precision. Gradual transfers to an LLC owned by Lucas. Consulting payments with no supporting contracts. Trust distributions positioned as cushion. Legal filing 10 days prior. Text message delivered while he sat beside a hospital bed. He reopened the state filing for LM Advisory. Registered address. A suite in downtown Miami. He zoomed in on satellite images of the building. Glass facade. High-end lobby. Illusion of success. He thought about Rachel's text again. I'm with someone who actually understands me. It had sounded personal. Emotional. Now it felt transactional. His phone buzzed. Helen again. I reviewed what you forwarded, she said. The emails referencing asset insulation are useful. Useful how? They establish premeditation. Michael nodded to himself. Is this about him? He asked quietly. No, Helen replied evenly. This is about money. He let that settle. He looked again at the social media photos, Lucas leaning casually against a yacht railing. He imagined Rachel stepping into that world, believing she was stepping into freedom. Instead, she had stepped into documentation. He closed the laptop briefly and rubbed his temples. This wasn't romance unfolding. It was architecture unfolding. He reopened the email thread one last time. Once Florida residency is established, jurisdiction shifts. The phrase repeated in his mind. They hadn't been running toward love. They had been running toward advantage. The gradual siphoning of funds. The trust buffer. The relocation leverage. It wasn't impulsive. It was insulated. Michael shut the laptop completely and sat in silence. Through the living room window, the suburban street remained still. Porch lights glowed softly. A dog barked in the distance. Normal. Stable. Nothing about his environment suggested collapse. Yet beneath it, strategy had been moving for months. He stood and walked upstairs, pausing at Ethan's bedroom door. He opened it quietly. Ethan lay sprawled across the bed, one arm hanging off the side, breathing evenly. Michael stepped inside and adjusted the blanket. He looked at his son for a long moment. Then he whispered softly, not to Ethan, but to himself. The move wasn't romantic. It was financial. Rachel didn't run toward love. She ran toward protection. Miami wasn't an escape. It was a strategy. Chapter 5. Silence as Strategy. Rachel called 3 times the morning after Helen filed the emergency motions. Michael watched the phone vibrate against the kitchen counter while he poured cereal into Ethan's bowl. Dad, it's buzzing. Ethan said, spoon halfway to his mouth. I see that, Michael replied calmly. He flipped the phone face down without checking the screen. Ethan shrugged and went back to eating. The phone stopped, then buzzed again, then stopped. Michael finished packing Ethan's lunch, signed the school absence note from the ER visit, and walked into the car like any other weekday. Routine was oxygen now. On the drive home after school drop-off, he checked the call log. 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails, a string of texts. He didn't open them. Instead, he forwarded the screenshots directly to Helen. Subject line, incoming communication. He added no commentary. Her response came 10 minutes later. Do not engage directly. All responses through counsel. Continue documenting. Michael typed a single word back. Understood. By noon, Rachel tried again. This time a text. You're really not going to respond? He forwarded it. Then he opened a folder on his laptop. He had renamed it the night before. Not divorce. Not case. Simply documentation. Inside were subfolders. Bank transfers, email, threads, court filings, communications. He dragged Rachel's latest message into the communications folder and labeled it by date and time. It felt clinical, deliberate, necessary. At 2:17 p.m., his phone rang again. He stepped outside before answering, not to speak, but to let it go to voicemail and privacy. Her voice came through seconds later. Michael, this silence thing? It's childish. We need to talk. You can't just pretend I don't exist. He replayed the voicemail once, then forwarded the audio file to Helen. No reply from him. At 4:30 p.m., Helen called. Emergency motion hearing granted for tomorrow morning, she said without greeting. Asset freeze. Yes. Temporary, pending review. And jurisdiction? We're arguing that relocation attempts violate standing jurisdiction. Given the timeline, we have strong footing. Michael nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Anything else from her? Calls. Messages. Good. Continue not responding. The next morning, Michael didn't attend the hearing in person. Helen advised against it. Appear calm and stable at home with your child, she'd said. I'll handle the courtroom. So he did exactly that. He helped Ethan with reading practice at the kitchen table while waiting for updates. At 10:42 a.m., his phone vibrated. Helen, order granted, she said simply. He remained still. Temporary asset freeze is in effect. All accounts flagged. Transfers beyond ordinary expenses halted. He exhaled once. And relocation? Jurisdiction retained here. Florida petition attempts blocked for now. Michael looked at Ethan, who was sounding out a word from his workbook. Excellent, he said quietly. By early afternoon, the ripple began. First, an email notification from the bank. Account status update. Review initiated. Then another. External transfers under investigation. At 3:12 p.m., an automated notice from a financial institution he barely recognized. LM Advisory Group, LLC, account hold notice. Michael stared at that one longer. He forwarded it to Helen without comment. 5 minutes later, his phone rang. Rachel. He let go to voicemail again. Her message this time was sharper. What did you do? He saved the voicemail. Forwarded it. By evening, another call. This one lasted longer before going to voicemail. You froze everything? Michael, this is insane. Lucas can't even access payroll. Do you understand what you've done? He stood at the sink washing dishes while listening to it. The water ran steadily. Plates clinked softly. He felt nothing resembling triumph. Only inevitability. At 8:04 p.m., Helen called again. There may be IRS interest, she said. In what sense? When LLC accounts are frozen during domestic litigation, agencies sometimes review reported income against transaction history. Michael processed that. Is that bad for me? No, for them. Potentially. He ended the call and walked upstairs to check on Ethan. His son was assembling the lighthouse puzzle on the bedroom floor. Look, Dad, Ethan said. The top part's almost done. Michael knelt beside him. Nice work. You're not mad anymore? Ethan asked suddenly. Michael paused. About what? You were quiet yesterday. He smiled faintly. Sometimes quiet is just thinking. Ethan nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Later that night, another message came through. This one wasn't sharp. It wasn't accusatory. It was different. Can we just talk like adults? Michael read it twice. The wording was deliberate, softer, measured. He didn't feel the pull to answer emotionally. He didn't feel the urge to defend himself. He opened his email instead, forwarded the message to Helen. Subject line, latest. Her reply came shortly after, responding formally, tomorrow. Do not engage directly. Michael set the phone down. In the living room, the house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. The asset freeze had moved like a domino through the financial structures Rachel thought were insulated. Lucas's LLC accounts were frozen. IRS inquiries had begun. Financial institutions were flagging transactions. Rachel had expected outrage. She had expected confrontation. Instead, she got documentation. She got silence. She got court orders. Michael turned off the lights and stood for a moment in the darkened room. The storm had shifted direction, not because he shouted, not because he fought emotionally, but because he refused to. Upstairs, Ethan's laughter drifted faintly from his room as he replayed a cartoon scene in his head. Michael checked the door lock one last time and walked toward the stairs. His phone buzzed again on the kitchen counter. He didn't pick it up. Rachel doesn't get anger. She gets process. She gets filings. She gets jurisdiction. She gets law. Michael doesn't respond emotionally. He responds legally. Chapter 6, the first hearing. The courthouse was colder than Michael expected. Not physically, though the air conditioning hummed steadily through the hallways, but emotionally. The walls were lined with polished stone, the floors echoing under every measured footstep. Conversations were muted, urgent whispers between attorneys and clients sitting too close together on narrow wooden benches. Michael stood beside Helen near the courtroom doors. "Remember," she said without looking at him, reviewing a thin stack of papers clipped neatly together, "you don't react. No facial expressions. No commentary." "I won't," he replied evenly. She glanced at him once, assessing. "Good." Across the hallway, Rachel stood beside her attorney. She looked composed. Her hair was styled carefully, makeup understated but precise. Navy dress, low heels, calm posture. She held a leather portfolio close to her chest like a shield. Lucas was not present. Diane was. Rachel's mother stood half a step behind her daughter, chin lifted slightly, expression firm and unyielding. When her eyes met Michael's across the corridor, she didn't look away. Rachel did, only briefly. Then she straightened. The courtroom doors opened. "Carter," the clerk called. They entered. The room was smaller than Michael imagined. Wooden pew seating, elevated bench, state seal mounted behind the judge's chair. The faint smell of old paper and polished oak lingered in the air. They took their places. Rachel sat at her attorney's table, posture straight, hands folded calmly. Michael sat beside Helen. The judge entered, robe sweeping lightly as she settled into her seat. "Good morning," she said briskly. "We're here on temporary motions in Carter versus Carter." Rachel's attorney stood first. "Your Honor, my client seeks confirmation of emergency relocation to Florida and temporary sole custody, given the emotional instability demonstrated by Mr. Carter." Michael remained still. Helen made no movement. Rachel's attorney continued smoothly. "Mrs. Carter has secured housing and employment stability in Miami. The child's best interest." "Counsel," the judge interrupted. "I've reviewed the initial filings. I'm more concerned about the financial irregularities raised in the respondent's motion." Helen stood. "Thank you, Your Honor." Her tone was even controlled. "We have identified significant undisclosed financial interests omitted from petitioner's filing." Rachel's attorney shifted slightly. Helen approached the bench with a binder and handed copies to the clerk. "Exhibit A," she said, "bank transfer records totaling $85,000 to LM Advisory Group, LLC, owned by Lucas Monroe." Rachel's posture tightened just slightly. The judge flipped through pages. "Consulting services?" the judge asked. Helen nodded. "No contracts, no invoices, no documentation supporting legitimate business purpose." Rachel's attorney interjected. "Your Honor, these were professional engagements. Then documentation should exist," the judge said calmly. Silence. Helen continued. "Exhibit B. Email correspondence referencing asset insulation and temporary relocation leverage prior to filing. She read aloud one line. Once Florida residency is established, jurisdiction shifts. A murmur passed faintly through the room. Rachel's jaw tightened. The judge's eyes lifted toward her. Mrs. Carter, did you discuss jurisdiction manipulation prior to filing? Rachel's attorney quickly stood. Objection, characterization. Overruled, the judge said. Answer the question. Rachel swallowed. We discussed options, she said carefully. Before filing, the judge pressed. Yes. Helen moved to the next tab. Exhibit C. Whitmore Family Trust Filings. Petitioner listed no trust interest in her financial disclosure. Rachel's attorney stiffened. Your Honor, the trust is controlled by Mrs. Whitmore and is discretionary. Is Mrs. Carter a beneficiary? The judge asked. Yes, Rachel answered quietly. And did she receive distributions during the marriage? Rachel hesitated. Diane shifted behind her. Yes, Rachel admitted. Were those disclosed? Silence. The judge's pen tapped once against the bench. Mrs. Carter? No, Rachel said. Michael didn't move. He watched the smallest fracture appear in her composure, the slight tremor in her voice. Helen stepped forward again. Additionally, Your Honor, petitioner's income statements do not reconcile with known deposits over the past 3 years. We request full forensic accounting. Rachel's attorney rose again. This is disproportionate to a temporary custody hearing. The judge cut him off. When undisclosed financial interests intersect with relocation requests, it becomes very relevant. She turned a page slowly. Petitioner alleges emotional volatility from respondent. However, emergency filing was initiated while respondent was present in a hospital emergency room with a minor child. Rachel looked down. Timeline discrepancy? The judge asked. Helen nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The divorce petition was filed 10 days prior to notification. Funds were gradually transferred before that date. The judge looked at Rachel again. You sought sole custody and relocation before informing your husband? Rachel's composure wavered again. Yes. What? She inhaled. I was afraid of how he'd react. Michael remained perfectly still. The judge glanced toward him briefly. Has there been any documented incident of violence? No, Rachel admitted. Police reports? No. Protective orders? No, the judge leaned back. Then we deal in facts. The courtroom felt tighter now. The illusion of control Rachel carried and dissolved incrementally under questioning. Helen returned to counsel table and spoke once more. Given the omissions and financial irregularities, we request continuation of the asset freeze, retention of jurisdiction, and subpoena authority for LM Advisory Group and associated accounts. Rachel's attorney objected again, but the judge had already made her assessment. The asset freeze remains in effect, she said firmly. Rachel's shoulders dropped slightly. Full financial disclosure is ordered within 14 days. Helen nodded. LM Advisory Group and Mr. Lucas Monroe are to be subpoenaed. Rachel's attorney inhaled sharply, and the judge added, flipping to the trust documentation, Whitmore Family Trust will be subject to review. Diane's expression finally shifted, just slightly. Not fear, but discomfort. Rachel sat very still now. The polished confidence from the hallway had thinned. The judge concluded briskly. Court is adjourned pending further review. The gavel struck. Rachel stood slowly. For the first time since this began, her eyes met Michael's again. This time, there was no certainty in them, just calculation and something else. Uncertainty. Rachel's composure flickers. For the first time, she looks unsure. Chapter 7, Miami Cracks. The first crack didn't come from courtroom. It came from voicemail. Michael was in the grocery store comparing 2 identical jars of pasta sauce because Ethan insisted one tasted better when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it until he was back in the car. Rachel's name filled the screen. He pressed play. Michael, we need to talk. Her voice wasn't sharp this time. It wasn't confident. It carried something strained beneath it. There's been a misunderstanding about the accounts. Lucas's business is being audited because of emotions. Payroll is frozen. It's affecting more than just me. He let the message finish before placing the phone face down on the passenger seat. He didn't respond. When he got home, Ethan ran ahead of him into the house. Spaghetti? Ethan asked hopefully. That's the plan, Michael said. He washed vegetables while Ethan set the table, carefully aligning forks the way he liked them. Ordinary tasks. Predictable rhythms. The phone buzzed again on the counter. Another message. The funds weren't hidden. They were allocated. You're making this worse than it needs to be. Michael wiped his hands on a towel, forwarded it to Helen. No commentary. By the time dinner was finished, the ripple from the hearing had widened. Helen called just as Ethan was rinsing his plate. Lucas Monroe's accounts are officially under review, she said. Financial institutions flagged discrepancies tied to incoming transfers. Discrepancies? Michael asked calmly. Reported consulting revenue doesn't align with supporting documentation. There are also offshore leverage structures under inquiry. Michael leaned lightly against the kitchen counter. Offshore? Yes. Nothing illegal confirmed yet, but questions are being asked. He nodded once. And the trust? He asked. Flag for review. Diane has retained separate counsel. That part almost felt inevitable. After he hung up, Ethan padded back into the kitchen. Dad, can we work on the lighthouse? Michael smiled faintly. After homework, Ethan groaned but accepted it. Upstairs in Miami, Rachel called again. This time he answered, but said nothing. She spoke first. Are you enjoying this? She demanded, but the edge wasn't as sharp as before. It wavered. I'm following legal process, Michael said evenly. You froze everything. The court did. Lucas can't access operating capital. That's unfortunate. There was a pause. You didn't have to escalate it this way. Michael looked at Ethan across the room, carefully forming letters on a worksheet. I didn't escalate, he said calmly. You filed. Silence. Then, softer. Can we just talk privately? No lawyers. Just us. He shook his head, though she couldn't see it. No. Her breathing shifted, quickening slightly. The funds were misunderstood, she said. They weren't hidden. They were structured. Then the review will confirm that. Michael, I won't discuss custody outside of counsel. She exhaled sharply. You're being impossible. No, he replied quietly. I'm being consistent. He ended the call. He didn't feel satisfaction, only steadiness. The next morning brought another development. An email from Helen. IRS inquiry formally initiated into LM Advisory's transaction patterns. Michael read it twice. Miami had promised Rachel sunlight and distance. Instead, it had delivered subpoenas and audits. Later that week, Rachel's tone shifted further. Another message arrived. The trust review is unnecessary. My mother's being dragged into this unfairly. He didn't answer. We're under pressure here. He forwarded it. At school pickup, Ethan ran toward him with a drawing in his hand. Look, I made the lighthouse taller. Michael crouched down. It was crooked and uneven, waves sketched in chaotic lines around it. It's strong, Michael said. It doesn't fall, Ethan replied confidently. That evening, as they sat on the living room floor assembling the puzzle pieces, Michael's phone buzzed again. He ignored it. Ethan slid a piece into place and frowned. It doesn't fit. Try turning it, Michael suggested. Ethan rotated it and pressed it down. It clicked. There, Ethan said proudly. Michael looked at the nearly completed image, the lighthouse standing firm against painted waves. Upstairs in Miami, the illusion was thinning. Lucas's LLC was under audit. Questions about offshore leverage had surfaced. Diane's trust was flagged for review. Rachel called again later that night. He let go to voicemail. Michael, she said, and her voice trembled slightly now. We didn't expect it to spiral like this. The funds were misunderstood. They were part of a broader plan. He almost smiled at the phrasing. Plan? Yes. He didn't respond. The next message was more direct. If you don't agree to revisit custody informally, this is going to drag out. We can settle this privately. He typed a single response. Please direct all communication through counsel. He sent it. Nothing more. That night, Ethan brushed his teeth slowly, staring at himself in the mirror. Is Mom coming back soon? He asked quietly. Michael stepped into the doorway. She loves you, he said carefully. That's not what I asked. Michael considered the answer. She's in Miami right now. Ethan nodded, accepting that boundary without pushing further. After tucking him in, Michael returned downstairs. The house felt steady, not untouched, but anchored. He poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window, looking out at the dark street. Rachel had imagined Miami as freedom. Instead, it had become exposure. She had imagined insulation. Instead, she found scrutiny. She had imagined leverage. Instead, she found process. Upstairs, Ethan called out softly, "Dad." Michael went back up. "Yeah." "Why doesn't the lighthouse fall?" Michael sat beside him on the bed. "Because it's built to handle storms." Ethan looked thoughtful. "Do storms try to knock it over?" "Sometimes." "Does it fight them?" Michael smiled faintly. "No, lighthouses don't chase storms." He brushed Ethan's hair back gently. "They stand." Chapter 8, Forensic Accounting. The report arrived on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't dramatic. No knock at the door. No urgent phone call. Just an encrypted email from Helen with a single sentence in the body. Forensic review complete. Read carefully. Michael was seated at the dining table, laptop open, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. Ethan was at school. The house was quiet in that particular mid-morning way, sunlight slanting across the hardwood floors, dishwasher humming faintly in the background. He opened the attachment. 37 pages. Charts. Timelines. Transaction trees. He didn't rush. He read it the way Helen had trained him to read, everything now, line by line, without emotion. The executive summary was clinical. Findings indicate material financial misrepresentation in petitioner's disclosures. Michael continued. Over the course of the marriage, multiple distributions from the Whitmore Family Trust have been deposited into joint accounts. Down payment on the house. 2 vehicle purchases. Investment contributions. Operating liquidity during periods of income fluctuation. Each distribution was documented, dated, quantified. The report's conclusion was clear. Trust funds were effectively commingled and functioned as marital assets. Michael leaned back slightly. Rachel hadn't just omitted a technicality. She had omitted money that shaped their shared life. He scrolled further. Section 2. External transfers. A detailed breakdown of payments to LM Advisory Group, LLC. Total transferred, $87,460.12. Cross-referenced with Lucas Monroe's personal accounts. The report highlighted an internal movement of funds within LM Advisory. Transfers from the business account into Lucas's personal account within 48 hours of receipt. No payroll designation. No tax withholding markers. No documented consulting deliverables. Michael's jaw tightened, but his breathing remained steady. He read the next line twice. Pattern suggests personal enrichment derived from marital funds. Lucas hadn't just facilitated strategy. He had benefited directly. Section 3. Offshore entities. Michael didn't even know Rachel had offshore exposure. Yet here it was, an LLC subsidiary registered in the Cayman Islands, tied indirectly to LM Advisory through a holding structure. The forensic accountant's commentary was precise. Offshore structure improperly layered without legitimate business separation. High risk for regulatory inquiry. Michael closed his eyes briefly. Improperly layered. High risk. He reopened them and kept reading. Final section. Filing discrepancies. Rachel's sworn financial affidavit omitted. Trust beneficiary status anticipated discretionary distributions, external LLC compensation, offshore structural ties. The report's final line was unambiguous. Omissions appeared deliberate rather than incidental. Michael closed the laptop slowly, not in triumph, in confirmation. An hour later, he sat in Helen's office again. She had the same posture, as always, composed, analytical. "You've read it?" she asked. "Yes." "Questions?" "None." She studied him for a moment. "You understand what this does?" "Yes." She nodded once. "It shifts the court's perception." That afternoon, they returned to court. The atmosphere felt different before they even entered the room. Rachel was there again, polished, composed, but something in her posture had changed. Less upright, more guarded. Diane sat beside her, whispering occasionally. When the judge entered, she wasted no time. "I've reviewed the forensic findings," she began. Her tone had sharpened. Mrs. Carter, your financial disclosures were incomplete. Rachel's attorney stood. Your Honor, we dispute. You may dispute a trial, the judge said evenly. For now, I deal in documented evidence. Helen approached with a report. Page 12, Your Honor, she said. Trust distributions commingled within marital accounts. The judge flipped pages. And page 19, personal enrichment transfers. Rachel's attorney shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Carter, the judge said, looking directly at her, were you aware of these distributions entering joint accounts? Yes, Rachel answered quietly. Did you disclose them? No, what? Rachel hesitated. Her attorney leaned in, whispering urgently. It was oversight, Rachel said finally. The judge didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned another page. Offshore entity ties, Cayman registration. Rachel looked genuinely startled at that. That wasn't mine, she said quickly. That was Lucas's structure. But funds originated from marital accounts, the judge replied. Silence. The courtroom felt heavier now. The image Rachel had presented in earlier hearings, composed, protective mother seeking stability, was thinning under documentation. Her narrative had depended on Michael being volatile, reactive, unstable. But here he sat, still quiet, composed. He hadn't interrupted once. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't even shifted in his seat. The judge glanced briefly at him. Mr. Carter, she said, you've submitted substantial documentation without incident. Yes, Your Honor. No embellishment. No accusation. Just fact. Rachel's attorney attempted one final pivot. Your Honor, regardless of financial disputes, custody must consider emotional environment. The judge's gaze hardened slightly. And what documentation supports emotional instability? No answer. No police reports. No medical records. No witness corroboration beyond Diane's affidavit, now under credibility strain. The silence stretched. The judge leaned back. The court recognizes that allegations of volatility must be supported by evidence, not narrative. Rachel's shoulders dipped almost imperceptibly. Her composure flickered, not dramatically, but enough. The judge continued. The asset freeze remains in effect pending further proceedings. Full financial disclosure is ordered under penalty of perjury. She closed the file. Mrs. Carter, credibility matters in custody determinations. Rachel didn't speak. The gavel struck. Court adjourned. Outside in the hallway, Rachel approached Michael for the first time since the process began. You didn't have to dig like that, she said quietly. I didn't dig, he replied calmly. I responded. She searched his face for anger. There was none, only steadiness. You're making this worse, she said. He shook his head slightly. I'm making it clear. She looked away first. As she walked down the corridor with Diane, her steps were slower than before. The narrative she built of emotional instability, of protective flight, no longer aligned with the documents now stamped into the court record. Michael stepped outside into the late afternoon air. He didn't feel victorious. He felt aligned. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't retaliated. He hadn't tried to win through emotion. He had simply assembled facts. Rachel's narrative collapses. The image of an unstable husband no longer fits the documentation. Michael never raised his voice. He raised records. Chapter 9. Custody secured. The courtroom was warmer this time, but the air felt heavier. Paper stacks, pens clicking, and the soft shuffle of feet on polished tile filled the space with quiet tension. Michael sat beside Helen Brooks, hands folded on the table, eyes calm, shoulders relaxed. Ethan was absent. He didn't need to witness this. The work of securing his life and stability happened behind the adult veil of law. Across the room, Rachel sat with her attorney. Her posture was rigid, but the sparkle of confidence she had carried through previous hearings had dulled. Diane lingered behind her, whispering occasionally, her expression a mix of concern and thinly veiled frustration. They had hoped the narrative of emotional instability, rushed relocation, and protective urgency would carry the day. The judge entered, robe swishing softly, gavel poised. We will proceed with final determinations in Carter versus Carter. Rachel's attorney immediately stood. Your Honor, We request reconsideration of custody arrangements. The child has been with Mr. Carter for months, but we believe a more balanced schedule would serve the minor's best interest. Objection noted. The judge interjected, eyes sharp. However, I have reviewed forensic reports, bank documentation, and all filings related to trust distributions, external transfers, and offshore entities. Allegations of instability have been examined against actual evidence. Helen stood calmly, spreading a stack of neatly organized files across the table. Your Honor, the respondent has maintained steady care, documented every interaction, and demonstrated consistent emotional and financial stability. Custody determinations should reflect these realities. The judge nodded. I have considered the child's well-being, the accuracy of financial disclosures, and the history of parental responsibility. Based on documentation and testimony, full physical custody of Ethan Carter is hereby awarded to Michael Carter. Visitation for Rachel Carter will be supervised and coordinated through court-approved channels. Rachel's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth, but her attorney shook his head subtly. She closed it again. The words she had practiced about love, care, and urgency dissolved under the weight of evidence and judicial scrutiny. Additionally, the judge continued, all financial disclosures must be complete, current, and accurate. The Whitmore Family Trust will remain under ongoing audit. Any attempt to obscure distributions or manipulate reporting will result in legal penalties. Michael's face remained calm. He had anticipated this, prepared for it, and yet the quiet satisfaction was subtle, almost imperceptible. He didn't glance at Rachel. He didn't smirk or lean back in triumph. His eyes were on the files before him, on the order itself, the formal confirmation of stability restored. Outside the courtroom, Helen handed him the official copy of the custody and financial orders. Read carefully, she said. Every condition, every clause. Michael did, page by page, line by line. Each stipulation reinforced what he had worked toward for months. Security, transparency, predictability. Ethan's life would continue without the sudden storms that had been thrown his way. Rachel lingered near the exit, talking quietly to Diane. Their faces showed strain. For months, they had crafted a financial and legal narrative designed to insulate Rachel, to shield Lucas, to create the illusion of leverage. Now that scaffolding had been stripped away, Michael stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun. The warmth was familiar, grounding. He breathed deeply. The world hadn't celebrated this moment with banners or applause. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no vindictive victory. Just clarity, just stability. His phone buzzed with another message from Rachel. He ignored it. It was polite, almost pleading now. Can we discuss Ethan's schedule privately? He forwarded it immediately to Helen. No commentary, no emotion. Process, not reaction. Later, he returned to the quiet of his home. The living room smelled faintly of dinner. The dishes were done. Ethan's homework sat completed on the table. The lighthouse puzzle, half assembled, waited patiently for him. Michael picked up a piece and placed it carefully, deliberately. He paused. The lighthouse had become a symbol over the past months, a reminder that strength didn't need to roar. Stability didn't need to shout. A lighthouse didn't chase storms. It simply stood. Lucas Monroe had faded from view. No calls, no messages, no presence beyond the financial entanglements already frozen. Helen confirmed that his accounts were under scrutiny, regulatory inquiries underway. Any advantage he had hoped for from siphoned funds had evaporated. Diane's trust faced review. For the first time, scrutiny replaced unquestioned control. Every distribution, every document, every transaction was now on record. The safety net they had designed for Rachel was unraveling. Michael opened his laptop and stared at the folder that had grown over the past months. Originally labeled Evidence, a clinical, almost confrontational name, he paused. It no longer fit the truth of what it represented. Slowly, deliberately, he renamed it. Record. It was no longer about accumulation of proof to fight or accuse. It was about permanence, accountability, truth. He didn't need revenge. He had no desire for spectacle. Every file, every note, Every forwarded email served one purpose: clarity, structure, order in a world that had been briefly upended. In the kitchen, he poured a glass of water and set on the counter. The sun slanted across the tiles, warm and grounding. He glanced at the living room floor where Ethan's puzzle rested, lighthouse upright, sturdy. Michael allowed himself a deep exhale. Quiet, measured, solid. The legal battle had ended not in dramatics, but in process. Rachel was diminished, not destroyed, but exposed. Her narrative of urgency and instability had been dismantled by facts. Lucas faded quietly, invisible beyond his frozen accounts. Diane faced the beginnings of formal investigation. The financial safety net they had relied upon had transformed into a structure under scrutiny. Michael smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. He did not celebrate. He did not gloat. He simply returned to his work, organizing the record, preparing for daily routines with Ethan, maintaining calm. The victories had been measured, precise, enduring. Michael never sought revenge, only truth. Chapter 10, The Lighthouse. Months had passed since the final court ruling. The house felt different. Not empty, not still, but steady. A calm that had been absent during the months of upheaval now permeated every corner. The rhythm of life returned in small, reassuring ways. Ethan's footsteps padding across the hardwood floors, the gentle clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the low hum of the dishwasher, the faint scratch of pencil on paper as homework was completed at the dining table. Michael moved through these routines like a man rediscovering equilibrium. He brewed coffee each morning, checked emails, organized the record, his meticulous archive of everything that had been challenged, threatened, or hidden. Every piece of evidence had been accounted for. Every transaction had been documented. The storm had come and tried to sweep him away, but it had only tested his steadiness. Ethan laughed more now. His laughter was lighter, unburdened by tension or fear. He ran across the yard barefoot, chasing shadows of his own imagination, a paper airplane in one hand, the wind tugging playfully at his hair. Michael leaned against the porch railing, sipping iced tea, watching. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the lawn, warming the edges of the house with a golden light. Inside, the lighthouse puzzle, once a chaotic tangle of scattered pieces, now stood complete on the living room table. Ethan had insisted on placing the final piece himself, carefully, deliberately, like he was marking the end of an era. Michael had watched, calm, steady, and offered only the occasional guiding word. Try turning it slightly. There, perfect. No applause. No dramatic proclamation. Just completion. The doorbell rang one afternoon. Michael wiped his hands on a towel and walked to the door. Through the glass, he saw her. Rachel. Her figure seemed smaller somehow. The confidence she had carried months ago, smooth, unflinching, commanding, had softened. Supervised visits, as ordered by the court, had stripped away the illusion of freedom she had imagined Miami would bring. She smiled faintly when her eyes met his. "Hello, Michael," she said, voice careful. "Hi, Rachel," he replied evenly. Not warm, not cold, neutral, measured. The supervising officer, clipboard in hand, guided her inside. Ethan hesitated, then ran forward, tugging gently at her hand. Michael watched silently, sitting at the edge of the room, arms folded, posture relaxed. He observed rather than reacted. Stability was his armor now. Rachel crouched to speak to Ethan. "Hey, buddy, I brought a little something." She handed him a small toy, an action figure, brightly colored. Ethan smiled, grateful but measured. He had learned patience and boundaries through these months. Michael rose quietly and stepped toward the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, watching them from a distance. No words escaped his lips. None were necessary. He had maintained control, not through confrontation, but through constancy. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves of the backyard trees. Michael stepped onto the porch, watching Ethan play with his toy robot in the yard. The storm had come. Months ago, it had struck like a thunderclap. Messages in the ER, emptied accounts, sudden filings, the chaos of betrayal. It had tried to take his son, to unsettle his home, to push him into anger or rash decisions. But it had failed. Michael inhaled deeply, letting the air fill his lungs. He thought back to the fluorescent lights of the ER room, the smell of antiseptic, the quiet rhythm of his son's heartbeat on the monitor. He remembered the text, sharp and final. I'm moving to Miami with him. I took all our savings. You're on your own. And his reply, 2 words, calm, deliberate. Good luck. He understood now that those words were not bitterness. They were release. A relinquishing of what he could not control, a focus on what he could. He had not needed to fight loudly. He had not needed to yell, to beg, or to bargain. He had stood quietly, consistently, legally, morally. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the lawn. Ethan waved a tiny robot arm, calling out, "Look, Dad, he can climb the lighthouse now." Michael smiled faintly. That's right. He stands tall. The analogy was simple. A lighthouse doesn't chase storms. It doesn't sway in the wind, doesn't collapse under waves. It stands immovable, a beacon. It guides, it protects, it endures. He thought about all the months of preparation, documentation, observation, and restraint. Every forwarded email, every recorded message, every line in the record had built toward this stability. He had never sought revenge. He had never sought humiliation. The court, the audits, the frozen accounts, they were consequences of truth, not malice. Ethan's laughter carried across the yard, chasing shadows and sunlight alike. Michael stepped further onto the porch, letting the wind tug lightly at his shirt. He watched the boy run circles around the small fountain, water glinting in the late afternoon sun. The lighthouse puzzle inside glowed softly under the living room lamp, completed and steady. Michael's thoughts drifted briefly to Rachel. Miami had promised escape, freedom, a new narrative. Instead, it had revealed her. Supervised visits had exposed the distance between perception and reality. The financial scaffolding she and Diane had relied on had been dismantled. She had not been destroyed, she had been exposed. Lucas Monroe had faded quietly from the story, no longer a looming presence. Diane faced scrutiny over the trust distributions. The illusions they had constructed dissolved under the weight of law and documentation. Michael sipped his water and set the glass down carefully. He didn't rush. He didn't speak. He simply observed the yard, the boy, the evening. Night fell slowly. Lights flicked on inside the house. Shadows deepened across the porch. The quiet strength that had carried him through the storm remained. He didn't need to prove it. The record, the completed lighthouse puzzle, the boy safe and laughing, these were proof enough. He closed his eyes briefly, recalling once more the fluorescent ER lights, the hospital bed, and Ethan sleeping peacefully beside him. That was when the storm began. The storm of betrayal, financial loss, and uncertainty. And yet, from that moment to this, he had remained unmoved, methodical, unwavering. Opening his eyes, he smiled faintly, not at victory, not at revenge, but at endurance. The storm had come. It had tested him. It had tried to sweep him off balance, to shake his foundations. But he had stood. Michael leaned against the railing, watching Ethan chase his toy robot across the yard. The lighthouse puzzle gleamed quietly in the living room behind them. He thought of the words he had once whispered. Good luck. They were no longer a statement of detachment. They were a statement of clarity, of release, of strength maintained quietly, steadily, resolutely. The quiet man they underestimated didn't fight loudly. He simply stood, and that was enough.